Baruch Hashem, wow, we have an awesome turnout tonight. So today I have an insight that I don't think it's particularly explosive insight, but I think it's a very critical insight. And it's an insight that will determine in many ways how we live our lives. And I feel like it's extremely relevant, especially being that we're going to discuss the 10th plague of this week's parasha, which is the plague in which the firstborn dies. And there's a lot of questions that we can surround around the 10th plague, but there's a ton of meaning to it. And this insight is relevant to all Jews, at all places, at all levels. And so the Torah tells us the following. Torah comes and says that Hashem comes to Moshe. And you have to understand, every single plague that Hashem told Moshe to give over to Paro, he got a warning. It wasn't a reality in which plagues would just come onto Paro nonstop. Paro got a warning, and it wasn't a one day, it was several days. And then 3 weeks after, he got the plague. And so on and so forth. It repeated itself. By the 10th plague, it was a little different. By the 10th plague, it didn't seem like he got much of a warning. But after 9 plagues of Paro committing, after the 4th or 5th plague, or possibly even the 2nd plague, he says, okay, I'm going to let the people go. Then he doesn't do it. And so on and so forth. I'm going to let him go. He doesn't do it. By the ninth plague, which is the plague of darkness, he says, okay, I'm going to let the people go. But eventually, he does not do it. And then he tells him, Moshe comes up to him again for a last attempt. He says, Moshe, I don't want to see you anymore. And and he says to him, if I see you one more time, I'm going to kill you. So Moshe says, okay, if that's what you want, not a problem. Moshe walks out. And in the coming days, the 10th plague began. And so, what was exactly the 10th plague? 10th plague was a plague which all the firstborns of Egypt would die. Now I'm going to read you what it means, all the firstborns. It means that from Paro's firstborn all the way to the captives. Egypt was a massive country. It had captives. It had prisoners. Even prisoners that were in Egypt themselves, and they were the oldest, they were the firstborn, they would also die. So anyone who was a firstborn would die. There's an exception. Paro is also a firstborn, but he wouldn't die. There's a reason behind that. And he found out later. But even the captives, now the captives were not Egyptians. They come from surrounding countries. Why did they need to die? They did essentially nothing wrong. So we have a commentator, his name is Rashi. So he tells us why. He says something quite fascinating. And I think not only it's fascinating, but it's also very relevant. You'll see why in a second. The captives that were in Egypt, the reason they deserved to die, the firstborn captives, is because when the Jews were being enslaved, when they saw the downfall of the Jews, they were happy. They were happy to see the bad things happening to the Jews, like we see today on social media with all the Jewish hatred, how people are very happy. Like you had one professor in Cornell who said he was exhilarated and energized by what was happening on October 7th, right? Piece of filth, pure piece of filth, right? And all the other quote-unquote Ivy League and all these sophisticated institutions that pretend like they're about equality and diversity when in reality it's pure Jew hatred. And so you see from here that even the captives themselves, they were happy. Look what's happening to the Jews. So Rashi gives 2 reasons. Reason number 1, they were happy for the downfall of the Jews. Therefore, if they were happy, they deserve, as they themselves, as the first captives, they deserve the plague to come upon them as well. Rashi gives a second reason. And he says the following. The reason why they also deserve to be punished by the 10th plague is because since they were captives, then people would be under the assumption, if they would have remained alive, people would think it was the God of the captives that did this to the Egyptians. And if it's the God of the captives that did to the Egyptians, therefore, it was made specifically for them. So to make sure there is no confusion about the firstborn, whether it's the captives, the Egyptians, everyone was a target, except the Jews. The Jews were not a target. But really, the Jews were also a target of the firstborn. The Jews themselves also were subject to the 10th plague. But there was an exception. What did the Jews need to do to make sure God would pass over? They would take the Paschal lamb, they would take the blood, and they would, paint the doorpost with blood. And if they would do that, then they would have a merit. And they would have a merit, then they would be saved by the 10th plague, which is very difficult to understand. Why did the Egyptians deserve the 10th plague? Because of what they did to the Jews, right? That's why they deserve the 10th plague. The captives, they didn't really do anything technically to the Jews themselves. They didn't really do anything, but they were just happy at the downfall. And the Torah is giving us a reason why they deserve to die. In addition to the fact that we're happy for the downfall, because we don't want people to think, oh, it's the God of the captives that did this to the Egyptians, because the Egyptians took the captives in, they gave him a hard time. So it's not to give them the misconception that, oh, the Egyptians of the captives is really what's going to save them. No, it's not. Therefore, they also had to die. But the Jews, why do they need a merit? The Egyptians enslaved the Jews. That's clear. Jews did not enslave Jews. Why would the Jews need a merit to be saved? It's not clear. Which means if a Jew did not put blood on the doorpost, he would die. As the firstborn, he would not survive. It's a very compelling question. We need to understand. Because all the bad things that happened were to us. So we need a merit to save us. So, this is where I want to show you that the challenges we have today, they had back then as well. And so, how do the Jews perceive themselves? It must mean that the reason why the Jews would be subject to the 10th plague, which was the death of the firstborn, the only reason why they would be subject to this punishment is because they saw themselves as Egyptians. By taking the blood and putting it on top of the post means I'm a Jew. I'm not an Egyptian. Now, those who would see themselves as Egyptians, they're Jewish, but Jewish is just an adjective. It's not the main driving force. It's not the noun. It's not the main driving force, which means they're Egyptian Jews. But Jews that would take the blood and put it on the doorpost, they're Jewish. They're not. The noun here is a Jew. So the Jews that would take blood and put on the doorpost, then they're Egyptian Jews. But the ones that would not have done it, they would have been the opposite, Jewish Egyptian, which means Jewish is just an adjective. Egyptian is the main thing. How do I define myself? Do I define myself as an Egyptian or do I define myself as a Jew? Now, this is where they had a choice. What? God doesn't know who's Jewish when he was coming to smite the firstborn? Of course he knows who's Jewish. The question is, how do they define themselves? What drove them? What was their self-definition? Was their self-definition of, am I Egyptian? Meaning, I'm a Jew, but it's like the very famous thing, historically, during the Yom Kippur War, I'm sure some of you have read this before. So Golda Meir was the Prime Minister of Israel. And during the Yom Kippur War, Henry Kissinger was the Secretary of State. He was Jewish. He just died like a couple months ago. He died at the age of 100. So he came, represented America, and they trying to reach a ceasefire just like what's happening right now. And by the way, Anthony Blinken he's also Jewish. It's very interesting. And Henry Kissinger and Golda Meir she was the first female prime minister. She was very smart, extremely brilliant woman. If you just read the things she said, right? And she had a lot of difficulty and she had to resign after the war, but at the end of the day, she was extremely brilliant. In a one-on-one conversation she had with Henry Kissinger, so he wanted to kind of lay the playing field. And he says to her as follows. He says to her, Golda, I want to say this to you. First, I'm the secretary. This is how it goes like this. First, I'm the Secretary of State. Second, I'm an American. Third, I'm Jew. I'm a Jew. So, Golda Meir, she with her smirk, she she goes and says to him, I know in America we write from left to, from left to right, but in Israel we write from right to left. So in my eyes, you're a Jew, then you're an American, and then you're Secretary of State. She was trying to give him the hint, get your priorities straight, because at the end of the day, you're a Jew. And so their identity, the identity of the Jews at that time was very critical. Now, why am I saying this to you guys? Because how we perceive ourselves is going to determine what type of life we're going to live moving forward. It's very important. At your stage in life, you're at a very favorable stage in your life right now. If your priority is I'm driven by Jewish values, your life is going to look probably in the best possible way 50, 60 years from now. Beyond obviously establishing a family, but being part of a community, having the ability, if you're part of a community, to make a difference, engaging in some degree of philanthropy or charity, whatever it is, how you raise your children, the type of person you're going to marry. All these things, collectively speaking, is going to come from how you perceive yourself. If your priority, when you look at yourself and how you observe your life, is that I am Jewish, that's my driving force, you're going to make decision based on that. But if you define yourself as, I'm just kind of like culturally Jewish, I fast on Yom Kippur, it's pretty much call it a day. Okay, you can do that, it's an option. But at the end of the day, I'll say this, there was a study that was done about maybe 3 or 4 decades ago. It was done by Rabbi Lau. Rabbi Lau was the chief rabbi of Israel, and they took about 103 groups of 100 Jews, and then you had Reform Jews, Conservative Jews, and Orthodox Jews. And I'm not casting aspersions on anybody or anything. I'm just explaining what happened as a direct result of each movement. The Reform movement started with 100 Jews. Several decades later, there was about maybe a quarter left. Real Jewish, who were actually remained real Jews. And then you had the Conservative movement, who were a lot more involved in Jewish values and Jewish traditions. They have about a little less than half. Then you have the 100 Jews who are the last group were 100 Jews who are a combination of traditional and more orthodox, Shabbat observing Jews. There was just a combination of those where Jewish values and Jewish traditions were extremely important to them. Where they would put their they would put their children in Jewish educations, because it was a critical thing for them, especially if we live abroad. When they took those 100, you know what was left of them? They were in the thousands, because they reproduced. They got bigger and bigger and bigger. It wasn't limited to just that amount in itself. And so, in one of those ways, people ask me a lot of times, what's one of those things that can protect my level of my Jewish existence? And I say to a lot of people, you don't have to do this right away and jump on it, but you can grow into it slowly. Is, where is Shabbat in your life? Do you do Kiddush? At the very least? If you do that, do you go to synagogue? I'm not talking about what you do outside. You do things in which that you're connected to the system, you're connected to the people. What do you do? What are you able to do? I'm not saying jump right in the water, because I didn't start keeping Shabbat myself. I didn't jump in the water. It was a process for me as well. So at the end of the day, where are you holding with that? Shabbat is one of those things that if you get to a point where you don't just keep Shabbat, but you enjoy Shabbat, it's part of your reality, it's going to affect your whole life. Because if you are essentially on the path of wanting to keep Shabbat, or you see great in Shabbat, when you get, whatever it is, people say, when I get married, okay. But it depends. Maybe the spouse doesn't want to keep Shabbat. You may have a problem. So a lot of times people, they want certain things, but they themselves, I'll get there when I found the spouse. It doesn't work like that. you need to be the person yourself that you want to marry. And so the idea is Shabbat is one of the things that protects, it protects our level of Jewish existence and who we are as people. It's just one thing I'm referring to. The holidays as well. But the difference in holidays and Shabbat is something that is every single week. I'm not talking. I'll talk one day about Shabbat. I'm not here to talk about Shabbat. That's not the main of the talk today. But it's one of those things that you know is very likely to guarantee your Jewish legacy down the road, because it's something that you're going to have kids. They're going to be surrounded by your table. It's going to make a difference. You're not connected to the outside world. It's 25 hours with your family. It brings you closer to them. It does something to us. I mean, many people that I know said to me, "I'll never keep Shabbat. Never keep Shabbat." Okay, fine. You don't have to keep Shabbat if you don't want to. Can you do Kiddush? You're having dinner. What do you care? Have dinner with your family. Do Kiddush. You can have Shabbat lunch. Do it. Find something to connect. And if you see more benefit, just add more to it. So Shabbat, in a way, can be restricting. And again, I'm not going to talk about it now. I can understand that. But one of the things we have to realize is experiencing something is very different than what we think it is theoretically. Shabbat can theoretically be something very restricting, but if you don't experience it, you're never going to connect to it. You may feel like, yeah, it was a very, I struggled with it a little bit. It was restricting, but wow, the experience I had was unbelievable. It was uplifting. But you're never going to know something unless you give it a real chance, unless you actually go in there and you actually experience what it's like. See what it is from beginning till end. And so this is one of the ways in which we can preserve our ability to be Jewish. I'm not talking about assimilation. Obviously, assimilation, I mean, if you just use common sense, if a person does decide, okay, I'm going to put myself on a path that I want to stay connected to Shabbat. I want to be on the path to keeping Shabbat. What are the chances they're going to marry someone who's not Jewish? Very, very little. It's almost unlikely. Possible, but very unlikely. So we have things in place to preserve our ability to be Jews who are actually practicing. And it gets me to the next part. Not only does Shabbat can actually do that to us, but it also strengthens us as a Jewish people as a whole. If you attend synagogue, you're about a community. You're about connecting to one another. You're about, trying, every single synagogue that you go to, if there's a struggling family, there's money set aside to give a struggling family. If you're part of a community connected, you will always be taken care of. Hopefully we should be the one doing the taking care. We should be taking care of others. Nobody wants to be that. But the whole idea that we are tzedakah, which means charity, the community, it's halakha. They're obligated to take care of struggling Jews. It's an obligation. It's not a choice. The word tzedakah, what's the root word of tzedakah? Tzedek. Tzedek means justice. Meaning taking care of other Jews who are struggling is an obligation. It's not so much as, if I feel like it's as a community, it's imposed on a community as a whole. Which means the idea here is where it connects us on a level that's so much stronger, and it's almost as if, if you take like a number of take like 40 or 50, those shish kebab sticks. If you try to break them, you can if they're so connected together. But if you take one, you can. The community as a whole has a special level of protection. If you look at the if you were to put, hypothetically, a secular Jew, an ultra-religious Jew, a traditional Jew, or whatever you want to call a Jew, put them all in one line. Take an abominable Hamas terrorist and ask them, what's the difference between them? They'll say nothing, they're all Jew. They themselves see us as one unit. We're the ones who make the divisions. We're the ones who do avdala. We separate ourselves, we categorize ourselves. And by the way, I know it's going to sound a little off, but there's nothing wrong with doing that. There's nothing wrong with categorizing. There really is nothing wrong. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. In the Talmud, we have two schools of thought. We have Bet Hillel, the house of Hillel, and Bet Shammai, the house of Shammai. There were sparring partners, not in the physical sense. They disagreed on a lot of topics in Jewish law. And their disagreements were filled with passion. And if you walked in, you caught them arguing, you think they're about to go maybe to get into some sort of a fist fight. They were so passionate about the learning and about their views, the views that they espoused, what they believed in, but it was never personal between them. You know how we know that? Because they married their children with one another. Which means if you can disagree with somebody, if you have the ability to say, you know what, I disagree with his position, but you're able to marry their children to them, it must mean they have tremendous character. Because it's not personal. Today in America, we have a big problem. If you subscribe to one political party, you're considered a bad person. They attack you, your character, as if you're a bad person. That's a problem. You cannot hold a certain position without being attacked for who you are as a person. That means it's personal. That means it's not being driven by truth. It's being driven by, I don't like you because of how you think, or I don't like you because of your political position, whatever it is. It's outrageous. The minute it becomes personal, that's when you know it's not driven by actual truth. The Talmud tells us they had no problem being together. They disagreed. They had one argument for 2.5 years. They were arguing back and forth. Eventually, the house of Hillel conceded to the house of Shammai. They said, you know what? You're right at the end. Can you imagine you're invested in one position for 2.5 years, and then you say, okay, I'm going back on that position? It's very hard for a lot of people to do that, but he was driven by truth. You know, the greatest American literary, they say, is Mark Twain. Some of you obviously have heard of Mark Twain, read about him. He's considered the GOAT of all American writers. He was a renowned anti-Semite. He was known to be an anti-Semite, but he was extremely intelligent. When he wrote things, when he wanted to convey a point, he had everybody's attention. And I want to tell you something that Mark Twain wrote. Maybe some of you have read this. Now, typically when I read something, I don't like to read it word for word because you can lose the crowd. But he wrote something here. But he wrote this essay in 1899. He wrote an essay called Concerning the Jews. It was about a 5, 6, or 7-page essay. I read it. It's a phenomenal piece. And he writes the following. I want to tell you the paragraph that he writes at the end. He says like this. He says, if the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. Today that's not true. Today we're considered a fifth of 1%. We're just a fifth. But back then when he wrote it, which is at the end of the 19th century, he said 1% of the population. And he's English writing, he writes, I'm just going to skip this part. He says, properly, because they're so little, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of. You should never hear the Jew. Because he's so small, he's so irrelevant, he's nothing. Why would you? It's almost like like a small tribe in some sort of a country. They're not relevant. Same thing by the Jew. He said you shouldn't hear anything about the Jew. But you know what he says? But you hear about the Jew. He's heard of. And he's always been heard of, the Jew. And he says he's as prominent on the planet as any other people. As small as he is, he's as prominent as any other people on the planet. And he says his commercial importance, these are just fancy way of writing, which means his level of contribution, right? His commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. Everybody heard this and knows that the amount of Nobel Prize winners is extremely disproportionate to the amount of Jews in the world. They're like 25% of Nobel Prize winners are Jews, but they are less than 1/5 of the world's population, less than 1% of the world's population. That's what he means. And then he says something unbelievable. He says his contributions to the world list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, abstruse learning, he says, are always out of his proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He's astounded how they were able to achieve so much. And by the way, this is in 1899, which means just the just the creation of the state of Israel in itself, do you know how much contributions Israel gave? I'm not just talking about military contributions, agricultural contributions. I'll give you just another example. There is a company called Netafim. Netafim is a company that started in Israel, which has the ability to water plants by 40% less water and increase production by 50%. Countries who hated us, couldn't stand us, decided they want to be friends with us so they can partake in this technology. There's also something called Rewalk. Anybody here heard of Rewalk? Rewalk is an unbelievable thing. People who are paraplegics can walk. They can literally walk. And I saw this with my own eyes. It's unbelievable. They literally can stand and start walking. You know who invented it? Someone who's a quadriplegic. Someone who can't even use it invented it. It's an unbelievable thing. This is what Mark Twain is referring to. And he said the following: He has made a marvelous fight in this world, in all the ages, and had done it with his hands tied behind him. And he gives examples. He says the Egyptians, which are what we're talking about now, the Babylonians, the Persians. He said they made a lot of noise in the world and they passed. And then he said the Greeks and the Romans followed and they did the same. And then others came in between and they were nothing. He says the Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies. He's as strong as he has ever been, and he's not going anywhere. And then he says, all things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. And this is the last sentence. He says, what is the secret to his immortality? He never dies. As a whole, as Jews, you'll see what happened October 7th, an example. This was learned before the Holocaust. That's what's in it. This was before the Holocaust. It's an astounding thing. As a whole, we will never perish. We'll remain as one. But a lot of it is going to depend is how we see ourselves. If we define ourselves as Jews, if that's what's going to be the leading priority in my life, and I'm not referring to just religious behavior. I'm talking about Jewish values that we have. I'm not talking about culturally Jewish. I mean Jewish values. And by the way, as Jews, we contributed a ton to American culture, which America is one of the greatest countries to ever be on planet Earth. The opportunities we have, I'm extremely grateful to be here in America. It's an unbelievable country. Nowhere in the world can we be here like we are anywhere else. Yeah, we see what's going on in anti-Semitism and we become a lot more alert, but I'm very grateful to this country. And we contributed to this country because it was founded on Judeo-Christian values. Judeo means Jewish. And if you walk into Congress, you'll see Moses is one of the emblems they have in there. So, but even though that's the case, we have to remember, as Jews, this has to be the thing that we're defined by that. It doesn't matter how religious we are or how irreligious we are. None of that matters. It has to be that I'm a Jew. I'll tell you a story. One of the rabbis in my community, he is a video editor. And one time he went to an event where Holocaust survivors were there. And he's interviewing several different Holocaust survivors. And there was the last one, was a guy sitting all the way in the back of the synagogue. And when they were praying, he noticed he wasn't praying. And he noticed he didn't have a yarmulke on his head. And he noticed none of those things. And he said to him in the interview, he says, I see that you're not davening, and I see you in the back there sitting. Why are you here? He's like, I'll tell you why I'm here. He says, this is his exact words. He says, they're praying, giving their gratitude, saying sorry to God for all this stuff, whatever it is. He says, so this is what he said. He says, God should say sorry to me for what he did to me in the Holocaust. These were his words, exactly. Nobody's judging what he's been through. God should apologize to me. So he says, okay, I can understand where you're coming from. He says, okay, so why are you here? This was his answer. He says, I'm here because it's either them means anyone else who's not Jewish, or it's I'm here or it's us, and I choose to be us. He wasn't there praying. He wasn't there doing anything. His priority was, I'm a Jew, and I'm defined by this, and I'm always going to be a Jew, and it's never going to change. And as we have so much to contribute to every society we're a part of, and we have, and every single society that we were part of, and they expelled us, they suffered. And this is known to be historically true on every level. And so if you look closely, a lot of the Middle Eastern countries are suffering tremendously economically. They expelled all their Jews. Anytime there's been expulsion of Jews, those countries suffered. It's known to be, this is things that's been documented and followed and researched. At the end of the day, the mere fact that you guys are here, it just shows how much you place importance on what it means to be Jewish. The fact that you're wanting to grow, you wanting to learn. You guys could be doing many things right now. You can be going out, dinners, parties, having fun, watching Netflix, whatever it is. The mere fact that you are here is a testament that you're reinforcing those Jewish values, that we want to connect with each other, that we want to learn, that we want to grow. We want to have that connection. Because at the end of the day, our enemy made things very, very clear that they don't make any havdalah, they don't make any distinctions. We do it. There's nothing wrong if I see a Jew and I categorize him. But if I have something personal against him because of who he is, I've failed. Because my worst enemy doesn't do it. I shouldn't be doing it. And it doesn't matter if where I come from, or if it's, even with us Jews, there's Ashkenazi, there's Sephardi, whatever it is, and we make all these stereotypical jokes, but at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, there's no, when the Israeli army is in there fighting, they all have the same uniform. They may have different skin complexions, but they all have the same uniform. They all understand they have to watch each other's back. That's how we have to be. Just like we have to fight for peace, and we have to fight to protect ourselves, we have to fight for the unity of us as one. Not any less than we fight to protect ourselves. Because all the blessings are going to come only through peace. Tfilat Shmona Esrei, which is the pinnacle, it's the highest part of praying. When we pray Shmona Esrei, the last blessing we have is the blessing of peace. And the reason is we ask for many things. We ask for health, we ask for wealth, we ask for intelligence, we ask for multiple different types of things. But why is it peace? Peace is a form of you call it utensil or some sort of a kli. Kli is like a vase, something that can hold, like a receptacle, like something that I can actually go and hold. A vessel, right? A vessel. It's like some sort of a vessel that we can use to hold what I have, right? A sack, a vessel. Because after everything we ask for, we have to have peace for us to actually sustain and keep what we have. It's such a critical thing. Even in just to show you how far this goes, the Talmud says that when a husband and wife, ish ve'isha, zachu, shchina benehem, lo zachu, esh ochletan. This is a very, very famous dictum. A husband and wife, if they have a merit, the divine providence, the God's presence, right, will be between them. If they merit, a husband and wife. And if they don't merit, esh ochletan, the fire will consume them. What do you mean the fire will consume them? So the Talmud means like this. The word ish is aleph, yud, shin. That's how you spell ish. Ish means man. The word isha is aleph, shin, hey, right? So what does it mean God's presence is among them if they have a merit? If you take the letter yud, and then you take the letter hey, that's God's name. We say in Tehillim, Kol haneshama tehallel ya, hallelujah. So the word ya is God's name, which means within man and woman, God's name exists. And if you take God out of the equation, then what do you have left? If you take the yud out of the aleph, yud, and shin, you take the yud out, it's ish. Ish means fire. And if you have isha, which is aleph, shin, hey, you take out the hey, it's ish. It's also a fire. They consume each other. What does that mean that God's presence is among them if they have a merit? What does that mean? So I wanted to say the following. I had this insight yesterday. When the Talmud says that a man and a woman, ish v'isha zachu, a man and woman will have a merit, then the divine inspiration or the God's presence will be among them. It should not have said that. What should have Talmud should have said? That ish ve'isha shchina benehem zachu. That if a man and woman, if Hashem's presence is within them, then they will have a merit. Why is it flipped? Why is it backwards? Why are you telling me they merit, and then after they merit, then God's presence will be among them? It doesn't make any sense. The idea here is God's presence is what is the merit here in their marriage, not the other way around. What does the merit have to do before God's presence within the marriage? What is the merit here? There can't be a merit. If God comes between them, then there is merit. But what merit is there afterwards? It's not clear. It should say man, ish ve'isha, man and husband, right? Divine. If God's presence is within them. Zachu, then it's a merit that God's within the marriage, but it doesn't say that. It says first God, and it says man and a wife. If they will have a merit, then the divine providence will be with them. That's what it says. It doesn't make any sense. So I want to suggest the following. The way God is going to be within a marriage, the way He's going to be in the marriage, and it's not for religious reasons, is if each spouse feel lucky they married the other one. If each one feels like I'm lucky that I married her, and she's lucky, and she feels lucky that I married him, you know what's going to happen? It means that when they connect to each other, when they speak to each other, they feel a sense of gratitude. They feel like I'm the fortunate one. And that's going to affect how they treat one another. Which means they're going to have not only a tremendous amount of love and respect for one another, but they'll be happy. They'll have, and that's the essence. They'll have peace and harmony between them. And if there's peace and harmony between them, that's when all the blessing comes. Then, if there's peace and harmony between them, then God's presence can actually dwell among them. But if there's no peace between them, God's presence cannot dwell among them. It cannot be there, God's presence. It doesn't work. It doesn't matter how religious you are. It doesn't matter how secular you are. If there's no peace between a husband and wife, if there's no peace between us, the Jewish people, God's presence cannot be with us. That's one of the things, the ways that we have to feel fortunate and lucky that we married the other side. But what happens if we think, oh, I couldn't have gotten better. I definitely could have gotten better. I could have got a guy who's more ambitious, a guy who's more successful, and he says I could have got a girl who's more befitting for me, who is more for my taste and my liking. If we have this mindset, when things get hard, what do you think is going to happen? We're going to fight. And the fire of fighting will consume us. But if I feel fortunate that I marry the other person, then even when things get tough, I'll get through that. I'll be able to overcome it. But it's how I feel. It's a feeling. It's not something you say in your mind. If you feel fortunate that the other side married you and vice versa, then all the blessings in life will come because you're surrounded by harmony and peace. The word shalom, and I said this before, means shalem. Shalem means wholesome. These are the things, and as Jews, and you know what happens when as Jews, we feel, when you see a fellow Jew, sometimes maybe you're traveling in one of those deserted countries or whatever it is. When you see a fellow Jew, most of you for sure have a smile on your face. Like you see a fellow Jew, you're connected. Oh, I got another Jew. There's this very special feeling when you're in a place where I see, I have another Jew with me. There's something that connects us. Even, they actually did a DNA study. Even you have Kohanim, priests, who come from Middle Eastern countries, Ashkenazi countries, South America, Australia, all over. They share the same exact, there's one DNA that they all share. There's one part of the gene that they all share as one. We're not just connected on a social level, but even on a biological level, there's a sense of connection between us. It's an unbelievable thing. But all that needs to come from the fact that we have to take pride as Jews. The Jews in Egypt, all they had to do is they had to make a declaration. What's your declaration? Do you define yourself as Jewish? Is that what's driving you? If that's what's driving you, then you get a merit to be saved. But if not, then you're considered an Egyptian. And if you're considered an Egyptian, the Egyptians did a lot of bad things to the Jews. Now we're coming essentially with the retribution. Now we're going to come with the punishment. So now as a result, you don't deserve to be saved because you consider yourself as an Egyptian. You deserve now what's coming to the Egyptians. But if you're a Jew, you have a special opportunity. And anytime we define ourselves as such, many blessings will come to our life because we're driven by those values. Are there any questions? Any questions? None. Well said. ברוך אדוני לעולם, אמן ואמן. Yeah. Wait, he has a question. He has a question. What's it? Yeah.